My name is David Albert, and I grew up in New York City, urban areas. We never grew anything. I didn't know any animals. I didn't know anything about villages. I knew nothing about India. I knew nothing about Gandhi. This was not on my radar screen in the least. I then went to college at Williams College in the late 60s. I then, from Williams College, went to Oxford University, and I thought I was going to be a medieval English scholar. I ended up, between my years at Oxford, teaching in Iran. And the reason I went to Iran was not because I was particularly interested in Iran, but because I was very poor. I was a poor student, and I needed to find a way to see Europe. And so if I went overland from England to Iran, I would see all the countries in between. While I was in Iran, many of the poets and writers of the country were being killed. And actually my first published article was what happened to the writers and poets under the Shah. And the experience was quite harrowing for me. And I thought, while I still thought at that point in my life I would be a scholar, I decided that there had to be a way to change the world so these kinds of things didn't happen. So I went back to the University of Chicago, something called the Committee on Social Thought, where I spent 3 years. And I studied with a woman, a very well-known philosopher named Hannah Arendt, who was interested in alternatives to Western liberalism and became interested in Gandhi in the last years of her life. And I became very interested in Gandhi as offering another way out to the problems that beset our world. She happily died in the middle of my dissertation. And it was good because at that point I had decided that I really did not want to be a scholar, I wanted to be an activist. So I joined a nonviolence training community based on Gandhi. And my first trip to India was in 1977. I was the American representative to the Asian Seminar on Nonviolence Training, held in Gujarat. It was just after the end of Indira Gandhi's emergency. People came to this conference, had been storing up their speeches for 2 years. All the men wanted to stand up and give long speeches, but there was a woman there, her name was Krishnamal Jagannathan, now Padma Bhushan Krishnamal Jagannathan, who I found absolutely compelling and fascinating, and I followed her home. And that began my lifelong journey in India. Now, my community that I was working with in Philadelphia was doing nonviolence training for movements all over the United States, actually all over the world. And they were publishing materials, but haphazardly. So I thought, well, given my skills as a writer, I would start a publishing house, New Society Publishers. It was the first and by far the most successful Gandhian publishing house in the United States, actually in North America. It's still going strong today, actually, although it is based out of Canada at this point. We published books on all aspects that related back to Gandhi. We didn't always talk about Gandhi, but we talked about nonviolence and feminism, we talked about the anti-nuclear movement, we talked about people's struggles, we talked about alternatives to violence, we talked about conflict resolution, conflict mediation, communal harmony, and I published all these books. I had no training as a publisher. I learned from my competitors. They all became my friends. And it was a very successful venture. I left that a little later. I was very good at business, but I didn't like to do business. I wanted to be a writer. And after leaving the it's odd, after leaving the publishing house, I wrote 11 books. I wrote one book when I was with the publishing house. I was extremely interested in Nai Tailim education. I'm good friends with Jyotibai Desai, now 95 years old. I'm going to see him tomorrow. And his work in Gandhi Vidyapith. Became very interested in Nai Tailim and ultimately in constructive work. Constructive work is part of the three-legged stool it could be. There is obviously movement work, work towards satyagraha. There is constructive work, and then there is policy-making work. These are three legs of a stool. That's the way I see it. And the part I knew least about, actually, was constructive work. So I became extremely interested in constructive work, and an opportunity arose in 2006 where I had friends. I'm a Quaker, and I had a Quaker friend who had learned these technologies to provide simple, clean water to the villages. He actually learned the techniques in Mexico, and he came down to see me, and we formed a partnership, which became Friendly Water for the World. I had interest in water before because I had worked in Dalit communities in Tamil Nadu. And once we got land for the people, that is the work of Krishnamal and S. Jagannathan, got land for 15,000 Dalit families who'd been landless, the next problem was water. The children were always sick within the Dalit community. They couldn't afford health care. They couldn't get good medical care. Something needed to be done about water. And I had not done anything at that point until I made a partnership with this other man, another Quaker, and we began Friendly Water for the World. We work with the most marginalized and disadvantaged people. This is worldwide. We're working in 10 countries right now. We work with widows, people with HIV, former child soldiers, especially in the Congo, tribal communities and Dalits, people with albinism, a condition that makes your skin too white, and if you have this condition in Tanzania, you may be killed. Survivors of wartime rape and sexual violence. Some of the situations we deal with every day are unbelievable in this regard. We deal with orphans and survivors of genocide, unemployed youth, refugees, and differently abled people. I have to tell you that choosing to work with these folks makes our work infinitely harder. There are many societal reasons and forces on them, but the other thing that we find constantly, and we saw some of it yesterday in Maywat, is people wallow in their victimhood. They see themselves as victims. They don't see the assets in their own communities. And one of the things we have to do is simply give them enough courage to understand the assets that they have. I've been at this for 50 years. I still can't find anything better than Gram Swaraj. Just can't. I don't know how to get there. I've never built a single village. But nonetheless, that ideal still seems to me the best possible ideal moving forward. And then finally, effective altruism. We try to show, both people here but in the United States, that you can do amazing things with very small amounts of money. The idea that you don't need to have billions, you don't have to be a millionaire, you don't have to have millionaire backers, but that you can make really massive changes with just very small inputs. This picture, I took this picture in Uganda. It's actually the village of Kasana. This 9-year-old boy, both of his parents had HIV, and they were getting weaker. And so they took the boy out of school, and he walks 9 kilometers twice a day to bring this water home. That's the only water they have for the family. By the way, his parents are now healthy. We've gotten them healthy. And in fact, in the village of Kasana, with 59 families with HIV, we have had no deaths since 2014. I'm not sure we have to talk about Gandhi. We have to talk about Gandhi and Ideas. And they can be embodied in different cultures, in different settings, but the ideas contained within Gandhi, there are so many that relate to people everywhere who do not know Gandhi now, and they will not know Gandhi in the future, but they will know the ideas, the importance, the number one priority of communal harmony as being the basis of everything. Work to eliminate class, or in India, caste. Work, all of this work to make the village a vibrant, critically passionate place to live, that people will want to live in villages where they can experience the joy of living with their neighbor as well, rather than as single individuals in cities. Gandhi has so many messages about how to make peace, how to wage conflict, how to mediate conflict, how to empower people, poorest people. The poorest people, for example, often think of themselves as victims, and they are within our systems, but they also have assets that they have not even dreamed about before. And through the kind of work that you get through constructive work, entire communities can be uplifted to believe in themselves. It's not always so much the physical or tangible work, but it's people believing in themselves and in their own empowerment. My message for the youth of today is, don't do what we have done. The world today is in a terrible state. Ecocide, global warming, communal differences, political differences. We have not solved these problems. Question everything. Do not take our word for it. Do not take the word of books that were written 30 years ago for it. Question authority, question everything. Develop new ways of living and being together that are relevant to you today, now. If I had a special message to you, I would have given it to you 50 years ago. What I have learned is we as older people have not done very well. We've set up education systems that don't work. Even though you all have you may have a PhD, or you may have higher education of some sort, you are not solving the problems of today through education. You need a basic education, a way to get involved and engaged in the world. But you must think critically all the time about what is going to work to build a better future for all of us.